Okay, hello, here we are. Let's do this. Welcome to another live experience with Conscious Together. My name is Lorien, and today we are going to do some discussion, some reflection, some exploring of consciousness, of what consciousness is, what it means, and some meditations on the experience of consciousness itself to see how that feels and to see what insights that might unlock for us in respect of the understanding of our minds, the condition of our minds, and the nature of the thoughts that are part of that space. So, I have a few bullet points, a few bullet questions to try and steer today's conversation. And hopefully, we will have more of a scientific lens about this. So, I'm going to try and steer away from the woo side of the concepts that can be part of this space. And I should stress that whilst I have an interest in the scientific aspect of this, that is not to say that there is not elements, and there clearly are elements that we don't understand fully, and also that science is a moving goalpost, and that things that are established and held to be true or we are confident in at the moment may be disproved tomorrow, next week, next year, next decade, and people will undoubtedly be looking back at what we think we know now at some point in the future and thinking how naive and foolish we were. So bear that in mind, that even when we approach this with an attempt at a scientific lens, at a rational viewpoint, that this is work in progress. It's work in progress for me in terms of my understanding of the evidence available, me locating the evidence available. There's lots of research out there, and I have only seen a fraction of it distilled in the journals and texts of people trying to make it easier for me to absorb. So it's important that we don't take anything too literally, that we take it in good faith in the rational approach, and that we look at it critically with the lens that we can apply to it based on our own experience and the evidence available to us. Looking at the essence of Buddhism as a little counterpoint to my introduction on rationalism, the Buddha said that we should test this for ourselves, that we shouldn't just take his word for it, and that we shouldn't follow on blind faith the lessons that he was sharing in respect of the mind and in respect of consciousness. It was encouraged and instilled in his followers that they would have to inquire into the practices to see if they worked for themselves. Otherwise, they didn't work. So, whichever side of the fence you sit on, or wherever you are in the middle ground between the two, it is always beholden on us to not accept simple dogma for the sake of it because it's comfortable and convenient, but to bring a curious and critical lens to whatever we're exploring and see what we can learn from that. So there you go. If you have any questions or comments, please leave them as always, and we will endeavour to answer them. You can contact us through the Conscious Together website, which I will add to the show notes below. As always, we will do some meditation in this space as well, which you are welcome to join in if you wish to, or you can, of course, just leave that piece undone if you prefer. So we're going to start with some questions, and I've got some notes here, which I'm going to look at in my screen. So we're going to look a little bit at what do we think consciousness is, and I'm going to approach this with a scientific lens as best as possible. We're going to talk about the significance of consciousness, how do we use it, what the limits of consciousness are or might be, the consequences of consciousness, although that might loop back into the significance of consciousness and our experience there. And then I'm going to lead a meditation inviting us to meditate simply on the space of consciousness itself. And hopefully that will make a little bit more sense once the conversation has taken place. So there we are. Without further ado. So what do we think consciousness is? So from the standpoint of scientific research, it is the space of our focus and our attention. And you may have listened to my broadcast last week, and if so, some of that is going to be repeated here. But our senses, our sensory organs, our eyes, our sense of smell, our sense of taste, touch, our hearing, collect about 11 million bits of data. 11 million bits every second. Our conscious awareness, our conscious attention can process only somewhere in the region of 10 bits. I think the theories range, or the evidence ranges in tests, depending on the test, from somewhere between 5 bits and 40 bits. But there seems to be sort of a settlement around the 10-bit mark. So that's 1/millionth of all the data that is received into our senses and goes into the brain that can actually filter its way into consciousness. Consciousness has only that much space. Our consciousness is often described as a spotlight or a lens on which we are looking at things. So typically it is where we are focusing our attention, be that physical attention through what we are observing, or our thought pattern attention. So if we're trying to decode a problem, then typically that is something that we are doing in consciousness. Although there is plenty of example of brilliant scientists gaining insight and other people gaining insight after sleeping on a problem and letting essentially subconscious processes do their work. So our conscious lens, our consciousness, is not the only place we solve problems by any means at all, but it is one of the more active aspects of our problem solving mechanisms that we use in waking hours. So if there's something on our mind we don't understand, then it's our consciousness that is picking through that is receiving inputs from the subconscious brain, going through our memory banks, our data banks, and trying to determine a reasonable outcome. Not necessarily a correct outcome, but it's trying to determine a reasonable outcome. So from a scientific perspective, consciousness is this, I say, simple lens, this narrow beam of focus that we have to give attention to a specific thing, but it's very limited in relation to all the feeds, all the inputs that surround us. So what's the significance of consciousness? Well, the significance of consciousness is that sense of being aware, that self-aware nature, which enables us to philosophize about the human experience and enables us to be very aware of our own limited time here in the universe, our limited life. We are painfully and acutely aware of our mortality, of our potential for injury, our potential for death, our potential for death, that we will die, that everyone that we know will be potentially susceptible to illness, to injury, to tragedy, and ultimately to death as well, just like us. Now, that's also one of the The challenging aspects of consciousness, right, is that painful self-awareness, that knowledge, which is sort of alluded to in the Garden of Eden stories. And again, this is purely from a secular perspective here today, but it's important to recognize all of the mechanisms, or the various mechanisms that humans have applied throughout history, throughout our time as conscious creatures on this earth, to try and understand, to try and describe, to make sense of this fairly peculiarly human condition, and this awareness of our life and the world around us, which can be truly wonderful and magical. It enables us to just take in the beauty of a sunrise, of the sparkling of the water. I take my dog for a walk every morning, and I'm lucky enough to live near a park looking over the sea. And I can appreciate the sky and the sea and the green and the blues around me. And my dog is obsessed with the ball and sniffing everything else, has no interest in the sky. Now, I don't know what my dog thinks of the sky. It probably doesn't feature too much in its level of consciousness. It's focused on very different things. But the fact that we can find the beauty and the wonder in the moment is, I believe, an aspect of consciousness itself. The ability to bring that to the center of our attention, to bring it forth from our subconscious, our unconscious mind, and bring it very much front and center, and to be present in that simple beauty. So consciousness allows us to be aware of our finite time on this earth, and can help us focus our attention and our time on things that we otherwise wouldn't be able to achieve, right? We can plan for the future. We can plan contingencies in a way that we don't see other creatures doing. This is a very peculiarly human circumstance, and is almost certainly a byproduct, a consequence of our consciousness itself. So this ties into then the question of how to use it, and we use it as described already. We can use it to plan for our future. We can use it to understand things that we, or to try and understand things that we don't. We don't need to apply our consciousness, and we seldom apply our consciousness unless we are using it as a mindful practice to things that we already understand. So when something is already deeply embedded, or we believe we understand it, and perhaps I should caveat that, right? Whether we understand it or not, we believe we understand something. Therefore, it is settled, rooted comfortably in our subconscious, and all our skills that we're competent at fit into this bracket, right? Whether you're driving a car, when you're driving a car initially, you're very much using your consciousness front and center to understand the skills, to figure the skills out, and to allow that to be processed down into your subconscious. But once you are competent at driving, once you have practiced those skills the sufficient number of times for it to have rooted in your subconscious thought patterns and processes, then the conscious mind no longer has to pay attention. And we've all done it. It's always used as an example that we will often travel some distance and not be aware of the process of getting from A to B in that journey, right? Our conscious attention is elsewhere, and our subconscious does all the processing, does all the action. And actually, the more we try and think about a skill that we are confident in, the harder it can often be, the more clunky it can be. Whether you're playing a musical instrument, again, it's something that you want to do on this autopilot, in this flow state, using the subconscious element of our mind to skillfully navigate, not the conscious element, or very seldom the conscious element. Although, again, there are bits that you can bring forth from consciousness to tweak your performance in the moment. But the essence of a musical performance, of a sporting skill, is done unconsciously. So much of it is unconscious. So we can use it to plan, we can use it to fix problems, we use it to learn new skills to process these things in place. We use it to wonder about the majesty of the world and the universe that we're part of. We use it to philosophize. That's just a selection of things. I'm sure there's lots of other things that we are using our consciousness for every day, depending on what it is that we're doing in life. So please don't think that's an inexhaustible list that I have just provided for you. So the limits of consciousness, and I mean, again, from a scientific perspective, this is very much the limit of the bandwidth of the process itself, give or take 10 bits per second. So we can only focus on a very limited number of inputs compared to all the outputs surrounding us. The other thing that's very interesting is that consciousness needs about a half a second input to trigger it. So we are constantly bombarded by inputs and signals. However, it takes half a second. A signal has to be sufficiently intense and protracted to register in our conscious mind. And this is the essence of subliminal messaging, subliminal information, and the fact that actually we do take in a lot of information around us that we don't consciously process, and that can influence and does influence our actions and our behaviors. And we see this constantly when our moods shift and something will happen that we have no conscious awareness of in the moment. And this might be a simple facial expression, it might be an aroma that reaches us. We're very wired to smell in our memory banks, and so a certain aroma will reach us and will put us in a different mental space, could trigger memories that weren't otherwise surfacing at this moment in time, and that can fundamentally alter our mood. A simple word or combination of words toned in a certain way that's familiar to something from our past, good or bad, right? This can be positive or negative, subconscious influencing of our behavior, of our state. And this happens all the time. And it's very important that we recognize this rather than just assuming that this is the way we are, or that someone else is the cause of our discomfort or problem in the moment. There is so much unconscious information bouncing around that we need to be very mindful of our responses, of our reactions, to see if we can decode some of this mystery and to stop us being locked into the sort of the chaotic waters of our lives when we're unconscious to all these things. And there are therapies like sort of neuro-linguistic programming that sort of actually take advantage of this subconscious process and help us to detach ourselves from unhelpful thought associations, anchors, they're known as, and help us rebuild new positive ones. And that all works on these sort of conscious, unconscious processes out there. So we've talked about a little bit about what we think consciousness is, the significance of consciousness. We've talked about the consequences of consciousness there as well. The fact that actually consciousness itself, in essence, is the root of our suffering, because we are aware and we can focus on all these negative things, possibly negative things or likely negative things in our lives. Then that is something that can cause us additional suffering, can cause ourselves to become anxious, to become depressed, to continue to think negatively about the space, and we can become swept away in that. So that is one of the consequences of consciousness. negative consequences of consciousness, if you like. So that's a brief introduction to that space, and I want to continue building on this over the coming streams, over the coming weeks, because this is a large topic and there's a large body of work supporting it, and I want to understand more of it, and I want to share more of that with you. So I have a number of books that I'm working my way through at the moment, and I will continue to do so, and I will look to expand my library in this space, and I will look to share my understanding as best I can with you, in the hope that it helps you and your understanding of consciousness. And the reason that we want to understand consciousness is that it can help free us from negative associations that we might otherwise be unconscious to, so that we can live a more examined life, to quote Sam Harris, so that we can be kinder to ourselves, be more constructive in our own lives, and therefore be better able to help others in their journey through appropriate empathy, through appropriate understanding of what they might be going through. And by being more stable and more present ourselves, then we can offer a more supportive framework for those around us, to help them build, to help them grow, to help them develop. And I think that's really, really important, that this, whilst this is an internal examined experience, and indeed, our experience is only ever our experience, but to apply it within the ethical framework of looking to do the most good for others that we possibly can. And I think that's critical for our own sense of well-being, and it's critical for the well-being of those around us. So there you go. So yes, I'm hoping that that taster of this has given you a little bit of interest and a little bit of insight to inquire further. And I will share the texts that I'm using, because you may wish to read them directly yourself rather than take my translation for them, and I would encourage you to do so. There's some really interesting material out there by some people who've done, spent their lives researching this stuff with a scientific diligence that I would never be able to bring forward, undoubtedly. So there you go. So that said, let's do a little meditation, and we're going to, the invitation is to meditate on the space of consciousness. And so a bit of preamble first. When, as alluded to before, what we're talking about with consciousness and meditating on consciousness in this context, with this scientific lens, is this small spotlight of information that our consciousness is processing, these 10 bits, give or take, of information that can come in and can come out. So this is going to be an open awareness meditation, and we'll begin in a minute, but I think it's probably worth doing a little bit of preamble for it. This is an open awareness meditation, so we're going to be receptive to whatever our body is picking up in the moment-to-moment basis, and what elements of that are being fed through to our consciousness. So in one moment, we might notice the sensation in our hands. In one moment, it might be the breath. In another moment, there might be some sounds that reach us. In another moment, we may become momentarily transfixed by a particular thought that arises, or other sensation. So we're not going to focus on one thing in particular. We're not going to focus on the breath or the body, although we'll introduce ourselves with that. We're going to allow ourselves as best we can to be aware of whatever comes into consciousness. And the invitation is going to be to then not attach to what we notice in consciousness. So something will appear. So from the 11 million or so bits of data that are bombarding us moment by moment, second by second, of those, potentially 10 bits, somewhere between 5 and 40 bits of data, will be received into our conscious space. And we're going to be curious about those and notice those. And we're going to let those go as best we can. So we're not going to attach to any of them. We're just going to let them be. And then we're going to see what the next thing is we notice. So what we're going to see if we can achieve is preserve as best as possible the openness of that space, the openness of the conscious. We're going to try and keep those 10 bits of data as clear as possible, not by trying to force something away, not by trying to think that we must keep our 10 bits of space clear, but just by noticing and letting go so that it's an open space to receive the next bit of data. And we're going to see what that feels like. I hope that makes some sense. If it doesn't, just focus on the breath. That'll be lovely in its own right. But we'll see how we go. So we'll do a meditation for a little bit. We'll do 10, 15 minutes, and then we'll see how we're doing. We might just bring the session gently to a close at that point, but we'll see where we are. So take your position wherever you wish to, whether you're sitting or lying. It's entirely up to you. And you can let eyes open or let your eyes be open or let your eyes be closed. Again, whatever is more comfortable for you. And both have value, as we discussed last time. So just settle the body in a position where you can be paying attention. So that might be sitting up a little taller. And we're just going to begin by bringing our attention to the breath. So we're just going to settle our focus somewhere narrow to perhaps ground ourselves. So notice the breath coming in and out at the tip of the nose. Notice the rhythm of the breath, whether it's fast or slow, deep or shallow. And notice the current level of noise in the mind. What thoughts are bouncing around? Any sticky thoughts or clinging thoughts? Any mood that is being carried in this moment? Any tension? Perhaps anticipation? Simply notice all of those things as best you can without any judgments, without looking to push anything away, without looking to change anything. Just cultivating a kind and curious attention to the present moment. And now open the attention from the tip of the nose and the breath to simply notice whatever it is that appears in conscious space. And that might be sounds, whether that's my voice or sounds from the environment around you. Might be a physical experience in the body, the breath or the feet, an arm, fingertip, nose. Might be thoughts themselves. a narration of the experience that we're so inclined to. See if you can open up to the space in which these things become aware. And see if you can acknowledge those appearances in consciousness and not attach to them. So we can't push them away. We're not looking to push them away. We're not looking to draw them in. We're noticing the space in which they appear and disappear as they do. See if you can open that space of the 10 bits of data, being curious about each bit that appears as best you can, focusing on the felt experience of that awareness. And if your attention's too distracted, too diffuse, then just focus again on the breath for a moment, or another anchor in the body, perhaps the feet, the hands, to settle attention. And then begin again when you're ready. Simple non-attachment. And simple isn't the same as easy. Some of these items will be very sticky, very clingy, particularly our thoughts. The narrator. Just keep falling back into the space in which all these things appear. Noticing the tendency to attach, to cling, to follow a particular element. And keep dropping back into the wider space in which all this is happening. And what's the felt quality of this? And remember, if this is too distracting, too open, come back to a physical anchor, begin again. Focus the attention somewhere narrow, the breath, the feet, the hands, something that works for you. Reground the attention. And then when you're ready, begin again. Noticing whatever you notice, sounds, texture, temperature, thoughts, feelings, physical sensations. And as best you can, being with the felt experience of the space in which this arises. So as we move to the final part of this practice today, you can either stay resting in this space if that feels like something you are connected to, or you can narrow your attention back to the hands, the feet, or the breath and be precise. Go with whichever version of practice feels needed. So, whenever you're ready, just start to come back to the space that you're in. Open your eyes and look around the space, the room that you're in. reorientate yourself, maybe have a little stretch, stand up gently if you need to, move around, have a little sip of water perhaps. And there's an invitation for some reflective practice on that practice. So just take a moment and consider how that felt, whether it was easy, intuitive, whether it was challenging, uncomfortable. What, if anything, you noticed about the thoughts, the feelings, the physical sensations. And from that, if there's anything that you might discern about your experience of your mind and your relationship with it. Or perhaps there wasn't much to notice at all. Just apply that curious lens as best you can to this experience that is yours. Thank you. So, thank you very much for joining me on this stream today and this beginning of our journey into consciousness, what consciousness is or might be, the pitfalls of it, its significance, how we use it, what the limits might be. And as I say, it is important because we should be aware that there's so much that we miss. And there's so much information that we're actually sending out to others that they can pick up on that we can be completely unconscious of. And this can significantly shape our relationships for good or for negative. So it's really important that we consider this space and that we acknowledge the gaps around our conscious experience and let go of this tendency to assume that we are only our conscious thoughts, or that we are our conscious thoughts and that we identify ourselves with them. And that's missing literally so much of the reality of which we are in. So I hope you found this interesting, or at least curiosity provoking. And let me know any comments, questions, as always, down below. Please like, subscribe, share this with people who you think might find it interesting or helpful in their lives. And you can email us at Conscious Together, and we will attempt to answer any questions that you have. So thank you as always, and I'll see you next time.